Let me tell you a little bit about what to expect. My only real job is as moderator to make sure things don't drag, to make sure things don't get protracted, to make sure we don't stay on one thing too long. You've all read the book. Each of you is representative of, hopefully, many, many, many tens of thousands of book buyers each. And so we have very carefully crafted, intelligent, articulate representatives from all these different market segments. And I think everybody realizes none of you were asked to submit your questions in advance, and we didn't even ask you if you liked the book. You know, we did not filter anybody in any way. But a peer review most of the time is done secretly by authoritative figures in an industry. Well, this time it's face-to-face. This time it's put the authors in the seats and let them squirm. Let them just ask, you know, on camera, unrehearsed, with no foreknowledge of the question. If this comes across as a puff piece, and you guys don't ask some legitimate intellectual questions that need intelligent answers, then people are going to get 4 minutes into this and throw away the DVD. We want this to be informative. We want you to ask the questions that the reader wishes they had the chance to ask. And so, without any further ado, Charlie, first question.
In one of the chapters you talk about time and the idea that the connections between cause and effect are not always straightforward or apparent. That time's the element that can differentiate an abandoned decision from a pending outcome. What are the tolerable limits, and how can American businesses establish tolerable limits with those kind of demands, and then do people have the discipline to actually do that?
Do you want me to take that?
Go for it.
So we also discussed in other parts of the book that there are some pre-existing conditions, right, including the focus on public companies to perform on a quarterly basis. So part of the reason why CMOs have such short tenures is probably because they're not measuring the right things. In other words, proving ROI is extremely difficult because everybody can sort of measure the I part, okay? And it's very difficult to attribute the R part. Was this a market that was eroding that we've saved? Or is this or are we planning for longer term? Are we developing customers 2 years out? And all of those things have value. So there's an inherent problem that comes from a sort of short-term focus. And on the other side of that, there's also a problem with the measurement. Fortunately, we're not being asked to solve the problem of Wall Street, okay? Because we're definitely not smart enough to do that.
Excellent answer. Mark, you look like you were kind of busting to ask a question. you were just twitching.
We just all wince when we say Wall Street.
I enjoyed the book, and I liked some of the strategies for acquisition, you might want to say. But as I think about a company like Procter & Gamble, fast-moving consumer goods really not only requires that they make that first purchase, but they make repeat purchases, and we concentrate a lot on building brand loyalty. And what I want to know is, how does persuasion architecture help to build brand loyalty?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways to do that. But let's start from one side first, and I'm sure Jeffrey has some other ideas behind it. On the first side, by thinking about it from the perspective of the personas, we can actually start thinking about even the product development and what are the features we're going to build into it to appeal to those different personas to actually have more brand affinity, right? And so that's one really clear way that we can do that. The other one is to think about, how do these consumers actually engage and find these products, and what's going to keep them remembering, next time they go to the store or not go to the store anymore, right? If they may go online to buy it, to actually be drawn to those products.
Right, and there's another side to this, which is that
I know you
in
had
the
the other
case,
side.
yes, in the case of consumer packaged goods, okay, there's another challenge, which is that you don't actually deal direct, so that it's much more difficult to actually measure scenarios. With the advent of RFID, I could conceive of that direction, okay? I think we've created a framework for doing that, and we continue to develop the framework. I mean, with John Cordo here, we've been talking for months about the concept of how to extend scenarios, because the scenarios that we describe in the book are all related to each other, and yet they start and they finish, and we call this a conversion point, but they're clearly connected to these other ones. There just needs to be more work done, and I think that one of the best answers we can give is we don't actually know yet. I can tell you that there is a framework here that I know how it might evolve, but I'm not really sure that the market is ready to go there in the next 18 months.
Right. But we're counting on people, like yourselves who are engaged in understanding this deeper to actually go out and do some of this research. Here's a framework for starting to think about it. Within your realm and your universe, there's other resources that you can bring in to actually solve this problem.
Now we go from representative of the biggest companies to the representative of the smallest companies, Craig Arthur. Craig.
What I like about the book, it's not just for corporate companies, and I don't want people to think that that's where it's all in. It's for every business owner, and that's what really got me excited. I think I got to about chapter 12 and kept going backwards and forwards. There was so much information there.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had a good friend of ours who called it rich, dark, juicy chocolate cake.
That's it. I had it all over my face. Everyone talks about the selling process. No one ever talks about the buying process. Persuasion architecture, to me, seems to really go back to the basics of how buyers buy. It doesn't matter whether it's corporate or small business owners. Can you summarise that process for people?
I mean, you can find tons of books about sales, right? It's a huge category. I'm sure Jonathan could confirm a little bit more about that. But there's very little about customers buy. I mean, last year, last couple of years, you've had books from Paco Underhill, and I know there's been a couple of books released about why women shop. But no one's taking time to say, okay, you know what? The world has changed. We definitely don't buy the same way we used to, right? I mean, we talk about in the book how, for complex products like cars and houses, almost 70 to 80% of people are actually starting their buys online, which didn't exist more than 10 years ago. And how are we going to deal with this today? And we talk a little bit about the buying process that really has almost never changed, right? The first thing you've got to recognize is that you've got a problem or a need, and you've got to figure out, where am I going to solve this from? And so you start doing some kind of an information search, usually within your head, right? Do I have a brand that, that will solve my problem, right? If I'm thinking, I really want to take music with me on the go, I might think of something like an iPod right away. And I might go ahead and do an external search, right? And I'll go on, Yahoo or on Google or, Ask or whatever it is, and I'll do a quick search, and hopefully some results will come, and I'll start triggering some ideas, and, maybe I'll find a possible solution. I start investigating it deeper and deeper, and then eventually I start winnowing down to one or two solutions. And then at that point, we say, okay, now I'm ready to take action. That next step is once I've made the decision to take action, I actually have to take the action. And that's probably the hardest part to get consumers to do. And that action must, more than anything, satisfy them. Or else you're going to keep seeing this vicious cycle, kind of like we talk about with Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill.
Right, but I think that one of the critical points is that there's lots of people that they start out and they say to themselves, we're going to be a marketer, okay? There are other people who start out and say, well, we're going to do sales, and we're going to do management, right? So what's missing is that this is a system. It's a synthesis. The first question that I was taught to ask when I was taught to sell was, how would the other person feel? How would you feel if you were that person? And I don't really know that the person who taught me to do sales was all that talented or was all that profound or meant to trigger all this thinking. But he's the person who actually brought me down this trail. I mean, when I came to Bryan and said, Bryan, you really have to come into business with me, and I dragged him out of graduate school for social work, it was because we both had one dying curiosity, which is why people do the things they do. It's the central core question that we have here at Wizard Academy. And so I was less concerned with what I had to say to you to buy than with what you needed to hear. And I don't know why we went there exactly or how we wound up there, but that's where the focus belongs.
Right, the consumer's in control today.
Tom Hochstetter, Yahoo.
So my question is, so I understand from Mark's point of view at the big company level, right? And I think it's a very good methodology to step people through a process. I'm small co. I don't have many processes. How do you convince me to take your book and then implement it at a small business level? I'm just a few guys with a great idea. How do you make it successful? I don't have people in systems administration in my company.
There's one part that I'll answer right away, which is how do we convince them? We don't. We won't spend any time convincing them because somebody convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. So first of all, they have to feel this need. We're not out there to sell. People have to be looking for the solution.
Right, they have to look to buy.
Right, and so the people who are looking, who have this problem and are searching for it, have come to us and they're both big and small. And what's funny is being small or big has seemed to have no impact on whether they're successful at it or not. What seems to make the difference in them being successful is whether they're sincere or whether they're looking for a black box, some sort of magical solution that's going to fix it. And if they're looking for a black box, this isn't it. You know, they really, I can recommend lots of other people. But we don't do black box. This is hard work. It's fundamentally different to have to think something through before you actually do it. There's a tremendous bias for action over actual production, right? But people want to do things, not necessarily accomplish things. And so I don't know that I can answer that question directly. What I do know is that it can be applied on anywhere from a campaign level. As we do at the end of the book, we very specifically end.
I mean, it could
with
be
that.
a little thank you, postcard that you send out to your past customers, right? And thinking that through to, whether you're buying a few, AdWords or, Yahoo banners or, whatever kind of little campaign that you're doing to drive traffic to your business, you can just plan it from there, saying, okay, you know what? If they come here and they're looking for this kind of thing, what would they expect next? And then what information do I need them in order to take that action, right? It's just,
Jonathan Merck, Thomas Nelson Publishing.
A couple of things. First of all, as we go into this conversation, I would ask you on behalf of the little guy who may not have the experience that folks in this room have, when you use acronyms, let us know what they are because there may be some folks who have read the book.
We apologize for jargon, absolutely. And we fell into our own trap. So.
we are human.
Don't be talking from inside the bottle, okay?
Right. Thank you.
Anyway, but secondly is, I'm from a company that is selling, and you talk about the compacted and non-compacted information. As a publisher, I am selling to a retailer who has the blinders of the compacted information. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to reach the person who's trying to buy from a non-compacted, and I'll quote, we don't make our choices based on the compacted information for a product. What are some ways that I can use persuasion architecture to reach the person that's making the buying decision from a non-compacted point of view, although I am selling directly to the person who is only making decisions based on compacted information?
I love that question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
That's almost exactly Mark's question, but here's the thing. I understand, we had this discussion at dinner last night, right? That people are buying our book, the book buyers are buying an ISBN number.
Right. From my perspective,
right. They need X to fill X amount of space, and they have Y amount of dollars, and they're going to look at the book scan numbers, and they're not going to read the book. They can't possibly read the book.
Right. It's not about the quality of the product, but I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people are actually going online to find alternative solutions, right? I mean, we talk about in the book, Jeff Bezos talks about in Amazon, right? So many of their books are that long tail because, you know what, the traditional brick and mortar bookstores are still living in that old media world and not thinking about it from this new perspective.
So the model is slightly broken. If we look at this model and say that it's incumbent upon the producer, right, the writer, okay, to go ahead and market this, or even the publisher to go ahead and market the idea so that you can pull it through the stores. And when it doesn't exist in the bookstore, you know, we were able to, and really we were able to because Mike Drew was able to give us that hand and just understood how to do it. We were able to push, as far as we know, being the first ones to push books onto multiple bestseller lists without being in any bookstores. We were in a couple of bookstores where Mike basically arranged for favors, okay, for them to carry it. And we had no traditional distribution, and yet we were still able to push through that channel. So I think that part of it is that the lack of contact with the ultimate consumer.
Actually, but only in the hard good. Because what you really are as a publisher is you're basically selling some kind of information, right? You are selling entertainment, you're selling some form of media, right? And so you can't think about it from the channels that you're in today, but how can you bridge across the channels, right? I know that, you know, and we're very grateful that this will actually be the first book that has, you know, a PDF of the book on this DVD in the back of the book. And I mean, that is a first, and again, it's the forward thinking, but there's so many other ways, right? We talk about doing you know, your own internet radio station that you can have podcasts with your own, you know, media person basically who's interviewing different authors and putting out information. You know, when you're thinking about the angles of information from a book, right? What are the different approaches that someone could come at this like? You know, even if you're talking about waiting for your cat to bark, right? We don't really talk about internet marketing in the book, but certainly there's angles to approach this book from internet marketing.
Right, or the fact that we've gotten an audience that we don't actually seem to actively address, which are salespeople. You know, Jeff Gittimer and Tom Hopkins were nice enough to hand us some very generous endorsements for the book. And what they basically was saying are, you know, we're answering a question that they're not getting answered. They're saying, hey, if your customer's coming to you with more product knowledge than you have, what do you do next? So part of it is how you think of what you sell,
How you repackage it.
right? If it's a hard good, it's a little bit more difficult, but your good is only hard because you've conceived of it as a book, as opposed to information.
Matt, you had a question earlier.
The piece that really struck me is those three questions that you're trying to answer over and over.
With three simple questions.
Right.
The thing that we say that we tell people in seminars that we can tell them those three simple questions and they could leave. We've just given the whole thing away. Right, yeah.
There's some media where it's easy to ignore what your customers are saying. But one thing that has distinguished the web from a number of other media is that people come to you entirely for a specific reason, and if you're not answering their questions, they will leave immediately. Other types of media, they tend to stick around for a while because they're there for other reasons. So maybe you could address that a little bit in the context of those three questions, and maybe talk a little bit about the three questions.
Well, I think that the first question is what action, right? We have to differentiate action between a mental action, a cognitive process, and an actual action, right? Because Bryan described the buying process before, and it's a series of actions. They're just not necessarily physical actions, right? But they're actually steps, something you have to do. You have to make a mental leap. And so there's a very big difference between intrusive media like radio and television, where what you're doing is branding. Okay, in branding, you actually are asking the customer to take an action, and that action is to associate your brand with that clue. And you have to ask yourself, well, okay, so that's what we want them to do, right? Who are they? What would motivate them? How would we write this ad? What would get them to make this association, right? On the other hand, when we're dealing with the internet, okay, depends which part of the internet. If we're dealing with a banner ad, which might be for awareness, you might be dealing in the same world of branding as opposed to the world of actions. And I think this is part of the
fuzziness that
the fuzziness that people have here is that they want to make it smaller of a concept than it is. It's actually a pretty big concept, and it has to say as simple as three questions. You just have to be clear about what you're asking people to do, and there are ways to measure whether or not branding has taken effect. I mean, we've got those, right? There are ways to measure whether or not people have taken certain actions in all sorts of environments, including, you know, the Procter & Gamble possibly doing something with a Walmart, with the RFIDs and all that kind of stuff.
Or as much as like we saw in the Super Bowl recently, that the amount of people that drove from Super Bowl ads directly online.
In honor of Jonathan's question of acronyms, please tell us what an RFID is.
Radio frequency ID. What a radio frequency ID is, as far as my understanding goes, is this little thingy that they attach to a product.
Little chip.
Right. Is it actually a chip? Okay. That allows you to track that product as it moves through. And
the
so
chain.
it's sort of like a barcode, except it doesn't have to be scanned. It has a little radio.
Michelle Miller, The Natural Advantages of Women.
I've done some work with your principles and used them and seen great success with them. And so I could go a little deeper into the book. And one section of the book on the development of personas, particularly where you talk about Best Buy, and I've done work with Best Buy and helping them develop personas beyond the Jill. There's one section that intrigued me and I also see could be potential quicksand for marketers. Okay. And that was when you were talking about character development and talking about the mask that a persona might wear. You give the example of BMW and the driver seeing himself as the conqueror. I could see marketers grabbing onto the mask idea and living in that world totally. So my question is, when is it appropriate to apply a mask to a persona, and what is the balance?
Okay, so let's take a proper understanding of what the persona is. We didn't use the word persona until 2002. Okay, before that we were thinking of them as modalities. If you go back and you read our copywriting book, which is our first self-published book, when we started thinking about personas is because the word persona seems to resonate with the audience. There are people using them in development and there are people using them in marketing. And we found that we were able to get people's attention if we said that, okay? What's appropriate and inappropriate is that you can turn these things into stereotypes. That's the quicksand. These are not people. They are techniques to develop empathy. And it's very easy to step over that line. And so you have to have a properly balanced team. You have to really understand what you're trying to do. And
you want to bounce them off of other people that can basically do sanity checks. I mean, every engagement we do, we're bouncing off customer service people. We're bouncing off, if they have a brick and mortar kind of, situation, we'll actually take it to actual salespeople and customer service people, the phone centers. Because if they don't feel real, then you've got that stereotype.
Actually, there's almost another test, but it's not something that's really easy to say, is if you don't get people's eyes lighting up in customer service or in sales, if they don't actually say, if they're looking at it and say, yeah, I guess that's right, you're off the mark. When it's right, they say, oh yeah, look, that lady just walked out the door a few minutes ago.
Or I just got off the phone with her, and you know what, you start rambling on with stories.
Right, it's an archetype and it works. And so the mask is a literary technique, and we've been talking more and more about developing the literary techniques. This is problem solving through storytelling, which is one of the oldest human skills. It's what we're best developed to do as human beings, is to tell stories. It's why we have words.
Right. Sit around the fire, right?
Yeah. Right? However, we get into these highly analytical, and sitting next to the chairman of the Web Analytics Association, okay? But we get into these highly analytical states where things can't represent, they have to be. And we just have to, the quicksand has to remain there because it will obviously be misused.
I mean, how many of you have bought on Amazon and you bought something else as a gift, and all of a sudden every recommendation is, the child's gifts? Or, I mean, it just throws off. And,
Right.
they're throwing tons of resources at this, and they still quite can't get it right.
It's a directionally correct thing, but it's not correct that you can do this all the time.
What if I have a very diverse business and I want to get the all human behavior or personas down to a select few that drive my business? How do I break that down? To her point, so I have quicksand maybe in a one-dimensional business. What if I'm a deep business?
Well, okay, so if you're a deep business, if you're a Yahoo, so let's speak specifically to Yahoo, because the question has to come from there. Yahoo has several businesses, and it is one large business. The only place where you're a business as one business is to investors. Investors are the only people who look at you as a business, and that there's a persona. You need to account for that persona, you need to know how to talk to them, and you need to know what to do with them. But if you start looking at your business lines, and I know that we warn people in the book that if they're coming out with too many personas, they're probably trying to compress this too hard. You know, IBM, which may be more familiar to people than Yahoo, to some of the readers and listeners, would be a good example of hundreds of businesses. You know, they sell hardware and software and consulting and
Or GE, same kind of
right.
thing.
So the simple answer is you can't do it for a deep and wide business. You have to do it for the line of business. And very possibly, if your business sells to different kind of businesses, even very similar businesses actually deserve their own personas. But it's something that has to be judged with a real question, right, as opposed to a theoretical one.
That was an awesome question, tremendous answer. As a matter of fact, I want to point out, I think it illustrates to the viewer and to the audience that these are two of the smartest guys alive today. Thank you, Tom, for that. Now we're going to go to Brian Massey, and then we're going to go to Dan Reutman next. But I do want to acknowledge our friend David Freeman from Beyond Structure, because I have to believe we're borrowing from him the understanding of the mask. And that is a tremendous, tremendous thing, and we should acknowledge him here. Brian, podcasting.
So yeah, my company's involved in, we can call ourselves rich media, apparently because we're digital. And the folks that are in the book publishing business get to call themselves old media. But the truth of the matter is that the book is the original rich media. So I'm going to call you on the carpet a little bit.
Please.
And I'm going to say, given that this is a way of your company communicating to a market, that this is at some level, a rich media marketing tool, as well as a great value. I did get a lot from it. Talk to us about some of the scenarios that you designed around this vehicle. Were there personas involved that you're addressing? Is this a part of a scenario situation? In other words, take us through, use this as a case study for what you teach us.
How about yeah.
Would you like us to undress? It's really not
No, but we'll share with you. You know what? Throughout our life cycle, right, of the company, we work with people like Dan, right? When Dan came to us, he had barely a business, okay? It was really struggling, and he went ahead and built a very nice, significant business for himself and for a bunch of his employees. To the people, you know, like the GEs and stuff like that. So we've worked on all scales. And while we realize that at this point of the business in terms of where we're actually consulting, right, the real heavy consulting work, we can't pare it down to the individual level. We're trying to get persuasion architecture out to more people, like some of the Wizard Academy partners that we've actually done this with, who are actually going out there and helping smaller businesses who can afford their rates and not in our structure.
But I'm going to answer you directly, because I don't think Brian's answered you directly enough. Yes, we had personas. Yes, it doesn't take a very difficult reading of the book to see us bouncing back and forth, talking to different segments. Yes, it was a balancing act to make sure that that happened. Without Lisa Davis, we would have been, I mean, because we bounced all over the place. This book was a hard thing to write because the publisher only gave us 208 pages.
Roy keeps telling us there's 9 books in there.
Right. We have several scenarios that we're trying to achieve. The number one scenario, has always been our number one scenario, is to educate people and to do it. And I say that with all sincerity, it's not possible, it's not humanly possible, it's not businessly possible, if that's a word, to ever do all the business that's possible out of persuasion architecture. It's a bigger idea than what we will ever do. There'll be people who take it much further than us.
And be much better at it than us.
Obviously, and there's all sorts of specialties. We'll never know how to apply it exactly to television or to each smaller segment of business. So first, we wanted to have this idea out there. It's our idea. We had it. We're proud of the idea. And we said, this is a big idea. We've connected some things. And so that's the first one. We want that was one of our goals, was to say, hey, this is ours. We did this. You like it or don't like it, we still did it.
You know, and in private, Jeffrey will pound his chest and do the whole Tarzan thing, but
right.
You know, not now.
The second goal was, obviously, we'd love to have business. Send us big bucketfuls of money, okay? But again, it was more to make an awareness. Most companies aren't at the level, even the people who approach us are not at the level where they're ready to implement this company-wide.
What I want you to do, and this is for the benefit of the viewer who bought the book, part of Bryan's question was the personas to whom the book was written. If you would describe now, truly, I mean, you made this whole taking off the clothes thing, we're about to do that. Because if you will describe for the readers what you consider to be the personas who might buy and read this book.
I'll share with you one. The second half of the book, a lot of the stuff exactly about persuasion architecture, we've put some of that out there previously. But the first half was really stuff that we've never actually articulated, and we just wanted to go out there. So we actually said, okay, you know what? We've got a few friends out there that fit various roles, and we want to get really their opinions on them. One of them was our friend Sam Decker, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, who formerly was from Dell, but he's also been an entrepreneur. He's written a couple of books. He's now working at a company that does word of mouth called Bizarre Voice. He's a business book reader, right? That was really important. The business books that he really enjoys, he'll actually sit and write really extensive notes about. So we knew, you know what? Sam's the guy who's going to tell a lot of people about the book if he really finds it interesting. And he came back to us and said, you know what, I read it, and there was a whole bunch of paradigm shifts in there, and, you know, I just want to, you know, I want to share it. And I said, you know, he asked if he can share one of his chapters with some of his old buddies at Dell. And then we knew, you know, from the corporate perspective, he was a right persona, and he really hit that perfectly for us. We had another one of our clients that we were thinking about, you know, great guy, deep thinker, but not a real original thinker. It's just not his strong suit. And we said, okay, you know, would this appeal to him? And we've gotten great feedback from him. And then, of course, you know, we asked a whole bunch of the Wizard of partners and to share it with a couple of, you know, smaller business kind of guys. So, you know, does this work for you?
And there was one other goal, and it's very particularly the whole persona concept, which was that we needed to present this as evolutionary rather than revolutionary.
Yeah.
The first half of the book was meant to tie it to what people knew. If what we had to offer was something that was revolutionary, who are we to be?
We pulled it out of left field now.
Right, who are we to be revolutionary? So we appealed to a particular mode of thinking, okay? We appealed to a very sensing type of thinking, okay? And we wanted to make sure that it was acceptable because what we're really advocating is change.
Right.
And change in companies is a very, very difficult process.
Right, and that this is the next logical step that they have to take.
Unless it's tied to the known, people are terrified of it.
Juan Tornó, Hispanic trending.
Okay, guys, given the diversity in the U.S., you guys speak Spanish, hablamos español juntos, and me through Hispanic trending, I'm trying to reach the business owners from the U.S. and help them understand the Hispanic culture. I was wondering, how does the persona development apply to a multicultural group of people, the multicultural consumer base?
You're going to leave that one to me, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay.
He's the older one. I can get away with this.
We really should have had a little bit more time on some of these. Okay, so as I'm stalling. But, okay, first of all, lots of businesses don't necessarily need to factor in multiculturalism directly into their personas. Personas are modes of approach. If we look at the human operating system, if we look at that, first of all, there's certain things that we can anticipate that people will need. And it's also based on level of experience. If we look at Hispanics in particular, we might need to anticipate in the persona mode whether Spanish is their first language, whether it's their preferred language. Those are real issues because they come to what kind of persuasion entity we present.
Right.
But in terms of the mode of approach,
just like Jeffrey and I, you know, we both live in the exact same zip code, right? We're 35 to 40 males in the same kind of business, but Jeffrey's first language was Spanish. Mine really was English.
Right. And Bryan doesn't turn on Spanish TV, and I do. And you can reach me early in the buying process. You could probably do fairly efficient branding for somebody who identifies closely with a Hispanic heritage and what speaking Spanish signifies to me. It's on a very emotional level, okay? But I would never go into any deep research or evaluating a more complex sale. I think that what we're asking is that personas are one of those demographic, if Hispanics in particular, something can speak to better than others, we haven't been doing work with them in particular, okay? But we can look at the rest of the personas almost entirely whole, right? We can look at things Hispanics maybe have. Some of their decisions are more complex because they're more family oriented, and so their consensus issues are greater. However, what language we're going to present it in, that's the demographic component that we actually spend the least amount of time focusing on. It's more about how to tell the story.
Right. The story may change based on the fact that he's Hispanic and why he was going to buy his rate. I mean, we use the example of buying vacations, right? A vacation to the typical, middle-class America knowledge worker may be very different than the typical vacation that a Hispanic
right, which is more likely to include a really extended family. So if you already have a hard time planning a vacation with your spouse and your 3, sort of teenagers, good luck to you. And if you want to include grandma and grandpa and aunt and uncle and and cousins, better luck to you. Okay, so in that sense, it's very important that it be considered. But I think that, again, as human beings, we only have so many angles that we can approach things at, and that they're somewhat predictable. You just have to be familiar with the audience.
It's just another nuance to keep adding on to it.
John Corto-Vontivadar, followed by Dan Reutman, followed by Charlie Riley.
Now, we've joked internally about techies. And as a technology person myself, I've often been the butt of that. And I don't have a hard time, I really don't have a hard time discussing persuasion architecture with other techies. That seems to flow very naturally. But it kind of struck me in going through the book that a lot of marketing people do not know how to have a conversation with their techies, period, let alone about persuasion architecture. And number 2, how do you turn the techies, instead of just being convinced, so you haven't really changed their mind that this is just some other type of crapola coming at them from marketing department again. How would you tell another marketer how to talk to their technological team? Because they absolutely need each other, both sides.
This needs to come from the corporate level. I think the same challenges CEOs are facing today with CMOs and trying to get them to be accountable, right? I think this is just as much of an issue of, how do you have clear communications across different people who have different communication styles? And I think one of the things that we're going to have to see is a little bit more of a language bridge between the two. One of the things that was most interesting about developing persuasion architecture and doing with you is, this got married from several different places. Part of it comes from a developmental process called Flip. The rest of it comes from a marketing background. So here we kind of said, okay, how are we going to merge these two into something that everybody can speak and everybody can kind of keep it so simple that no one's going to say, oh, that's way out of there. And so I think there's, the two components. I think there's, yes, there's going to be an educational level that's going to be real critical, and 2, not blowing this out of proportions.
Right. But we've also made 2 steps that are really important. One is your early insistence on us, even though we may use jargony sounding words, we've given attractive names to some of these things. We just can't help it, okay? But we've given real definitions to these words, and part of the things that technology people say, you can call them techies, but technology people are opposed to is the fact that everything seems to be so fuzzy and doesn't have a true definition. So first, thanks to you, we've really been able to give things hard definitions, and that's part of the challenge in communicating. But I'm going to actually say further away from that is that the adaptation of persuasion architecture is going to take 2 routes. There's going to be a tactical level at which people utilize the concept of persuasive momentum of these 3 questions, and they'll apply them ad hoc, and hopefully it'll open people's eyes up and they'll be much more effective. But there'll also be another level, and it'll be at the level that Six Sigma has been adopted. And it doesn't get adopted just because the CEO wakes up one morning and says, I think we're going to be a Six Sigma company. Okay? It's a real corporate change. It's something that's beyond my knowledge of knowing how to do.
That's why we have Dr. Grant, who's an expert in change management.
Change management. But this is a whole different way of thinking. This is something that's very accountable. that that you have to take very seriously. And the biggest challenge, we've had several CEOs contact us, and the first thing I always tell them is, I don't really know that you're going to be able to do this. And a lot of them are really excited about doing it. And I say to them, you know, what we probably need to do first is that tactical level and see how your culture interfaces with these new ideas. I think that it's almost impossible to just come in one day and say, hey, turn on the lights. We're doing persuasion architecture.
We're going to insert Jonathan, who wants to speak on behalf of the publisher for a moment, and then it's back to Dan Reutman, Charlie Riley, and Mark Huffman.
As we've been discussing this, several references have been made to the Wizard Academy, and could you explain what that is?
It's a school of the communication arts. It's a writer school, it's a school of advertising, marketing, journalists come here, inventors come here, and the communication arts are all the languages of the mind. Color is a language, shape is a language, words, of course, are languages. All the components that make up music are each sub-languages of the language of music. And the unasked question that always gets asked is, where did the wizard reference come from? Well, it obviously, if you study history at all, from 1619, about 8 years after the King James Bible was published, John Milton made the reference to the wizards who came from the eastern road following that star. And the word magi, or wise men, simply means wise person. And they somehow connected these events and saw a bigger picture out of it. And so wizard, wise person, studying things that very few people are studying. And the Dr. Grant that was referred to moments ago is Dr. Richard D. Grant, corporate psychologist and one of the board of directors of the Academy.
I was just concerned that as someone who deals with marketing, I didn't want any smoke and mirrors or hocus pocus.
So this is our campus, and these are our graduates and faculty and partners, and there are a lot of very interesting people like yourselves come here very, very often. So thank you, Jonathan, for the question.
Here's a more basic question. Let's say I'm a marketing director. A friend of mine recommended this tremendous book, Waiting for Your Cat to Bark, and the big sound of my head coming out of the bottle takes place. I get it. And to help me, other than going out and buying more books to give to my colleagues, help me take what I've just learned and what I'm getting and the light going off in my head and taking it to, I'm not a chief marketing officer, I'm not somebody at the top, but I'm somebody who is in the trenches, and I start to get it. How do I take what I'm discovering to help our company become more profitable and connect with the techies? How do I do that?
That's actually the situation that we were in for years and years and years. Somebody like Dan Reutman, who came to us, owned his own business, and it was a pleasure to deal with somebody who could make all the decisions. But it took, we've been in business since '98, it took several years before there were lots of CEOs of more substantial companies calling us, right? Or executive vice presidents, or that type of level. And usually it was a skunk's work. It was somebody who called up who said, I've been reading your stuff. Good stuff. I can't tell anybody here.
We had one guy become a really good friend of ours. Literally, they had no ability to make any changes to their website, zero. But they were able to change like one banner that was on the homepage. And that one banner that he was able to change, he got, what was it, a 81% increase in conversion, okay, which ended up accounting for millions and millions of dollars.
Right, it's a $3 billion company. We have a case study.
Not that much, it took quite a while to even get that.
Right, so the answer is that's exactly what we expect to happen. Please don't be discouraged if you're that person. Things just don't happen that fast. They take time, and if you just keep doing it, you keep doing it right, somebody will recognize it. Lots of the people that we've worked with, so some of these people who, who started out and they were managers or directors in companies have risen to much better levels. Some of the entrepreneurs like Dan, who's built himself a multi-million-dollar company, he's not even 30. Okay,
we're jealous. We are.
Yeah, it's like so. If you can't get it implemented in your company, do it on your own. We have another customer who was working at a
big corporate,
multinational, global 100 company who
Opened up his own little store online.
got great bang out of this, got some promotions, got it going, but could never get it high enough up in his, in his department. And at the same time, he had opened up his own online store. And he was whining to us the other day because he seems to have hit a little bit of a plateau, and he's not making more than $30,000 a month. And he's like, he's been doing that now for like 4 or 5 months, and he says, have I topped out? And it's like, listen, I remember. Okay, so again, I don't have a magic answer.
Start small, do whatever you can, and then you know what? Hopefully, people start noticing, and you can.
Dan Reutman.
Right.
Well, I mean, when I first was introduced to your materials, I mean, it was easy when it was just at first me, and I could implement it. I had a few people that helped me. Now, actually, I mean, a team of 20 people. I'm bringing in new ideas into the organization, and I have to make sure that they're formatted accordingly so people can really run with them.
Right, and I think part of it is what Jeffrey was talking about earlier. It's this storytelling. Your job today is you can explain to the people who work for you the stories that you expect happening, these scenarios that you can expect happening. And as they put together their campaigns, at the end of it, when they show you, okay, here's how we're going to measure it, you know whether they got your story right.
Right. I mean, the major purpose of persuasion architecture is so that you measure the story. Because as marketers, and there's a bunch of marketers in this room who are really, really talented. I mean, outrageously talented, people who have no need of any tool as long as they're operating alone. Okay? The biggest challenge that we have is that we can tell a story, we can intuitively come up with a campaign, we know where these ideas pop up, we can do all that, but then between the layers, somehow it dilutes.
Kind of like broken telephone?
The purpose of this, and this was the key, was to make sure that the business people, the people who actually are responsible for the bottom line, could sign off on the story, and that what would get produced is the story. Because you can't get, the executive vice president of a major multinational to sign off on, does this banner look good, or is this brochure, is that the right thing? They're not interested. But they do need to become interested enough in a real narrative of the bigger picture so that they can say, okay, these are the pieces that need to be done, and these are their objectives, and this is who they're speaking to, and those are the directions, that is the strategy that now needs to get implemented on a tactical level. Even on a 20 level, with 20 people, you have the same challenge, and we're about that same size. I know your frustration. And this is the cleanest way that we can think of to do it. And it's constantly even evolving. I mean, what we do, some of the things that we talk about in the book about the narratives, we actually used to have people look at a simulation of how a scenario would flow. And we'd actually built that in software. John spent a lot of time making it gorgeous. I mean, literally,
he had hair back then.
Right. It showed lags and time between things. I mean, we built this whole simulator. And then we found out that about half the people would actually go through it. And it wasn't necessarily whether they were higher or lower. That wasn't really the issue. It was whether they felt like doing it or not, right? Whether they were disposed to do it. And so we had to step back and say, okay, here's one more thing we need to do. We need to further develop this narrative and break out, as we do in one of the chapters where we actually say, okay, this is this part of the scenario, this is this part of the scenario, because you can get almost anybody to actually read something and say, yes, this makes sense, or no, change this or change that. But if you have to present it in any other type of format, it's just not readily accessible. So we've changed these things from the time where we were dealing with you as well, okay, to make them practical. I mean, this is an evolving science/art.
There's still the issue of how do you really break out the content, where it just seems like so much overlaps, and you could say, well, this page appeals to multiple people, or how do you really design your content strategy then?
You're actually going to approach that same information, even though a couple people can funnel through it, through slightly different angles. and give them both a way so that they can dive deeper into some of their points of resolution through that page.
Right. At the end of the day, certain content has to exist in common because the product you're selling is in common. But at the same time, how they see it is very different.
Do you find that your clients generally have to develop a lot of new content? I mean, thinking about Leo Schachter's site, for example. I mean, you one of the challenges is that, great, we've done the personas, now we realize all the content we have to create, but that's the problem. We have to create all this content.
Sometimes the answer is yes.
Right. Yes, I would say that generally the answer is yes, because most communications have been built for an average. And so unless you're willing to spend the extra time to turn them into the typical.
Yeah, this process makes it harder, not easier, that's for sure. Charlie Riley, major media.
You know, persuasion architecture is to, hey, what action do I want somebody to take, and then what steps I'm going to kind of move them there. Then you look at the existing world, there's a lot of non-online interactions. You know, you have a sales force of, say, 5,500 people. How do you get a sales force, you know, multi-thousands of people, to understand persuasion architecture and not derail it? Because you don't have the QA level that you would on.
So hold on a second. First of all, salespeople have a much better intuitive feel for persuasion architecture than marketers. Salespeople have been the ones responsible for actually taking the money.
and being accountable for all the actions that get taken, and for changing their presentation on the fly based on the questions that they're getting, right? The points of resolution of their customers.
So I think this is a challenge that's less daunting than how do you get the marketers to create the right collateral for the salespeople who are saying, hey, this brochure, it doesn't answer any of the questions my customer has. And I know that right now that there are salespeople sitting there saying, yeah, tell them. Because there's not a salesperson that we interact with, and we tend to go to the people who have interaction with clients. One of the problems today is that marketers don't have interaction with the person that actually buys the product, okay? And when we speak with salespeople, the thing is, what they tell us is that marketing seems to be out of touch. They don't really know what these people are asking. They're answering all the wrong questions. Why is somebody going to the Ford or GM or Chrysler or any of these sites when Edmunds or Cars.com or any of these other sites has better information? Why would I go there? Why do I need to go there when I can walk into the dealership and they can hand me the brochure? They're just not answering the questions that people are really interested in.
And the brochures cost a lot more money and don't answer enough questions and are just designed for that average.
So I don't think the salespeople are the challenge. I actually think this is the marketers who need the rethinking, rather than the salespeople. The salespeople have had to do this on
with
the
the
fly.
salespeople.
Mark Huffman, followed by Jonathan Merck, followed by.
I actually have an answer for him. The answer is buy books for all of them.
Mark Huffman, followed by Michael Drew.
I think you mentioned earlier that Roy insinuated there's about 9 books worth of material inside of this, and it's very dense. So say I go back to work tomorrow, and I'm there getting on the elevator, and there by himself is A.G. Lafley, the CEO of Procter & Gamble, and the door closes, and he says, read any good books lately? Now, I have him from the 1st floor to the 11th floor, okay? And that's all I have with him. Can you distill it down to 3 key points that you would have me communicate to him?
For A.G. Lafley, absolutely. Number one, you know how you said back in 2000 that the customer was king, was in control? I found a book that acknowledges that and helps us let the customer be in control while we still accomplish our goals. You're interested in reading it?
Whoa, that was almost a setup. You are good. Wow.
The 3 major thoughts are that the marketplace has changed. It's something that most really intelligent marketers have recognized. That people are still buying, but they're buying in a very different way, and that we have given marketers a framework for understanding how to satisfy those customers while still accomplishing the goals that we want. I think those are the 3 basic premises of the book, and if that sounds overly simplified, it's because you asked me to turn it into 3.
And I think one of the other things that's real critical today is, we mentioned in the book a lot, a lot of the marketers who've been brought up in traditional media are still, bound essentially by the thinking of traditional media. And they're always trying to find solutions as that next step in there, and they're just not there, right? I mean, we're seeing with teenagers today and the way they're communicating, it is way different than, here I am, just Jeffrey and I, right? We have 4.5 year difference. He is the older one. And I've been on
right, we are not twins. That is the question that comes up over and over again. Right. Thank you, Bryan.
But I've been connected my whole life. I've been on bulletin board systems since I'm 12, and I access things differently than Jeffrey will, right? And my daughter, who's 4.5, is already surfing and can use a trackball and a mouse, whatever. It doesn't matter.
And was at my grandmother's house and actually got frustrated because she had dial-up. This is slow.
And so one of the things that we've done is we said, you know what? Let's start with our focus about making sure that this media, this new media, that everybody's seeming to have challenges with, are not getting great response rates. 2% is an embarrassment for everybody. And here are guys who have cut their teeth there and have making it work. But you know what? They have a lot of respect for the people in traditional media, right? They've worked with them, they understand the needs, and saying, okay, how can we bridge these two? Because you know what? The world has bridged it, but as marketers, we haven't embraced that bridge yet. Right. And I think that's one of the key things of how we've pieced this together.
There's another part, and it's a little bit more tactical than that. But here's the deal. Right now, there's something called traffic cost inflation happening in emerging media. Okay? People are spending more time with emerging media than they're spending with traditional media. However, the cost to reach people in emerging media is still relatively low. And so my friends at Google and my friends at Yahoo might not like this idea, but basic economics, supply and demand, tell you that at some point you are going to reach equilibrium, right? It's going to sort of balance out. There's only disequilibrium for tiny periods, right, where you have some sort of arbitrage, and then it comes right back.
Well, we saw what happened with banner ads early on as well.
But we saw a very recent article where they're quoting the CEO of Blue Nile, who considers himself the most efficient converter of traffic in his industry. And what he's saying is that keywords, search, has become too expensive to convert, and that he's actually now looking at other media as well. What happens is that people who are in emerging media are the people who actually probably least understand this media. Some of the most talented marketers are not in emerging media. It's emerging, it's brand new, okay? The attention hasn't been brought to bear on it that should be. And what's happening is that when people have to spend, like we talk about for the word mesothelioma, right? Mesothelioma, right? Which is a cancer that comes from asbestos, okay? When people have to spend like $85 to click on an ad word like that.
And I suggest everybody should go research it and figure it out.
Right, okay?
And I'll just watch my back from all those
But when
lawyers.
you see those words at $85, you see the persuasive momentum that these people have built, whether they know what it's called or not. They cannot afford to not be relevant at every click. And so what's happening is that you still have people, and I know that we've put up recently in our blog an example with GoDaddy of just a total disconnect between the action that they said they wanted to drive people with a Super Bowl ad to the website, and on the website they didn't have something that corresponded to what was on the Super Bowl ad. That you know what the sound of that was? You ever hear a toilet flush? Okay, they got the traffic to the site. They had what
100% increase in traffic that day.
Okay, and it wasn't people who were going to go register that day. They were looking for the GoDaddy girl.
Right, because they said there's more at GoDaddy. I wanted to find more.
Okay, and so there was that disconnect. You couldn't afford to do that if the money was really there. And emerging media has to catch up.
Right. We got to start giving more money to the Yahoo and Googles. It's going to happen.
Right.
Right now,
and
they're still priced as an experiment.
Right. It's going to fix a lot of this disconnect. It's going to force
people to do this better,
to be more relevant.
One of the points you made in the book is talking about taking these personas down to the copy level. And if you overlay some of the wizard experiences that you've had, getting down to the right copy, which ultimately the cornerstone of search marketing is the keyword. which creates the campaign. So when you guys talk about getting it down to the keyword, can you really, again, from that funnel point, take it from the big human environment to these personas down to a set of words that are representative?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, looking for the city of Austin, where we are right now, is very different than me searching for Austin cheap hotels. The intent of the query is obviously different. If you are presenting the same information for both of those queries, you've probably been drinking too much. Okay? So intent is obvious in the words. People aren't giving intent the value because they're thinking of this as a technology problem.
And they're thinking of it as just a way to drive traffic from certain words, as opposed to thinking, okay, what does this word mean in reference to a whole scenario?
Right. If you're doing search marketing and you don't have a funnel point to bring them into a scenario, you're just throwing away your money. But it's the same thing. If you're doing radio ads and they say you're open on Sunday, and you're not, you're just flushing the money down the drain. And if you're doing a national campaign and you're selling Tide, and there ain't no Tide in the stores. So people get this, they just haven't applied it because in emerging media, we're still in this mindset of technology, not in the mindset of marketing. We still have techie geeks.
And he means that in a nice way.
My apologies to my good friend Matt Cohen and John Quarto, okay, who are basically in control of the medium because the higher echelons, the CEOs, the people that
are afraid of this medium.
Think that this medium is high tech. But I'll tell you what, any high school kid can put together a website. But not any high school kid can put together a great marketing campaign, or can they put together a television campaign? The technology behind producing television, film, radio is just as complex, and they've gotten over it. In emerging media, we need to get over it. We need to stop talking about technology being the solution to everything, and we need to start talking about it being just another form of media. And I know that Yahoo is sympathetic to this, but the answer isn't purely technological. These are tools. Tools are meant to be used, but media is meant to engage with people.
Excellent. So I've got Michael Drew, followed by Brian Massey, and then the good Dan Reutman.
We haven't done a lot of discussion about offline. I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
We gave a framework. Our work traditionally has been online, and we've been asked more and more to comment on things that are offline because we're marketers, not online people. However, a lot of the discussion we're having has to do with online for two reasons. One is that's our day-to-day business.
And that's where a lot of people are spending a lot of time on, and it's a real critical piece of it.
So that's
you can just observe so much.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, but the second thing is, as we say in the book, it's the glue. It really is where radio and television and everything sort of
print,
they intersect there. So it's sort of hard to stay away from it, and you can use it for all these other things. I mean, what is a conversion beacon except for somebody standing online at a checkout counter? We purposely gave you examples in the book that weren't online. But we got this understanding because we had to interface with technology people. As long as you tell stories, you can do things that are not technological. But as soon as you actually need to interface with technology, you have to break it down into something that is much more methodical. And so that's sort of the reason, yes, we can apply it to all those things. It's a bigger system. We're being asked more and more to work. In fact, we're being asked for a client right now to work with in-store displays. Okay, because they know, we've actually nailed the persona who's coming into the store because we know exactly what they're doing online. We know that it can only be one persona because the only persona that approaches this way from other angles, they're in this mode.
Good question, good answer. Brian, you've been very patient. Thank you.
In the scenario of going up the elevator with the CEO of Procter & Gamble, the first thing you said in your 3 points that you had made was that marketing has changed. And in the foreword and the first part of chapter 1 in the book, you talk about existing media is not as effective as it has been. But the CEO is going to go to the 11th floor and he's going to look at his reports and he's going to see those markets where my advertising is down, my revenue and my profit are down. And those markets where I've increased coupons, my revenue and my profits are up. So my question is, why is it important that old media be kind of on its knees for this to work, when in fact what I took from this was, aren't we talking about making better television commercials, more integrated television commercials, more integrated promotions at point of sale, et cetera?
Right, we're in agreement. Traditional media does not need to be on its knees. I think that what we're saying is that it takes ever-increasing amounts of that media to get the same results.
Because the mass of it is breaking, right? So we're not at the same thing. And the media needs to think about itself more than just in that media. I know that, Charlie can probably speak to this as well. Clear Channel, thinks of itself obviously as its radio stations and its billboards, but it's also thinking about how it's doing its things online, right? You can't be thinking just one or the other, because at the end of the day, your consumer can come to you, and media has to be agnostic, right?
To device, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a device.
I think that we actually say that in the book, but I'm glad you pointed that out, because we always run the risk of sounding like we're anti-something, and we're really not. It's all part of a mix.
It's just knowing what to use at the right time for the right person at the right stage of their buying process.
Right. I mean, if you talk about traditional branding, which we do in the book, in consumer packaged goods, it makes more sense to reinforce branding, but you're very unlikely to create the initial awareness there. However, for things that you buy very rarely, the internet is a better vehicle because of search, because people are trying to identify what a solution is. So you have to understand where people are,
how complex the sale.
Right, what the scenario is, and so then you decide. These are just all, arrows in their quiver. But I think that there's another danger. And that danger is that where people are mimicking tactics from each other. They're basically parrots. And what they're doing is they're saying, oh, this worked. And they don't know in which circumstances it worked. If you saw me sticking a pencil in my eye, okay, and I told you that it felt good, well, maybe I'm insane. But you shouldn't take from that sticking a pencil in your eye is a good thing.
Actually, online is a great example of this that we always try to teach. How many people here buy from Amazon, right? We've all bought from Amazon. Amazon is one of the few sites in the world that can get away with having people register every single time they want to buy, right? It's the one thing we advocate. We've seen it across the board. If you remove registration before people buy, you will increase your conversion rates. But for Amazon, it works. Why? Because it's Amazon. It's their brand. But people want to copy what they do, and they don't get the results.
And Amazon also has different objectives, because they've done some things that seem to sabotage the conversion of their new book sales. And you can tell that they're doing things that are favoring the conversion of their used book sales. Well, what would you rather do? Would you rather sell something where you take the money and you transmit electronic data, or would you rather sell something where you take the money and then you have to pack it and ship it? So unless you understand the context of the model, you can't copy somebody else's solution. If not, you're a bunch of marketers sticking pencils in your eyes.
Good answer, good question. Michelle.
You talk a little bit in the book about traditional focus groups and how they don't necessarily work, being, in my kind words. I've been reading lately about use of media to get information, to help create these personas, understand motivations. What do you think about these instant messaging type focus groups and different kinds of surveys? And is there a way to apply persuasion architecture to get information?
There are probably other tools, but every single time you're in a survey situation, you've got to take it with a grain of salt, because there's always a self-selection mechanism involved in there, and we can get married to what people tell us, as opposed to observing in real life. One of the most interesting things, we had someone we had trained to do persuasion architecture on a site that they sell in the malls, and they sell quite a bit online. I won't tell exactly who they are. And he spent a whole bunch of time in the malls, in the shops, actually watching people buy. And he was able to bring things to their attention that they had no idea about, that actually changed the way they did their whole business. As opposed to just sitting there and asking people, well, how did you go about buying this or choosing this? Just sat there and watched. And I think it's more of a, anthropology is probably a better way to think about this, as opposed to, just dialogue.
One of the most important things that you lay out in the book is the idea of the persona. And earlier in our conversation, you've talked about how a persona is not so much about an actual person, but a way to visualize
a decision-making process. And it seems to me that the reason to have multiple personas is to make sure that you're considering all the different permutations of the way that people make a decision. And it sounds like many of the people that you work with struggle with how do you pick the personas. The different dichotomies in terms of fast decision maker versus slow decision maker, someone who makes a decision logically versus someone who makes it emotionally, someone who focuses on facts versus someone who focuses on relationships and feelings. But what are some of the more critical, in addition to those things that I've laid out, what are some of the more critical things that you want to include in your persona so you don't miss them?
I think one of the things, I'll just start with, I'm sure Jeffrey's got a couple answers, but one of the ones that definitely I didn't hear you talking about, what level of knowledge do they have about the product that they're interested in? What kind of previous experiences do they have with the product? We talk about this in terms of the sales complexity, right? So we take knowledge, are there consensus issues? That's really, really important. Oftentimes we'll put a couple together, or we'll say, okay, this one has to present it, and how we can give him material so he can present it back to a CFO or stuff like that. The risk involved, right? Is this something that's going to be a huge personal risk, or is it just, doesn't really matter, right? And then, of course, the need, right? How deep is the need? And by focusing in on those issues of complexity, it's why we make these complexograms, really helps us ensure that the persona, besides these dichotomies and dimensions that we're talking about in terms of their buying process, we're really filling their needs. Because ultimately, if you're not focused in on their needs, you're not going to get the results no matter what.
The having of that discussion always brings about additional elements. But the other basic thing that you have to consider is that Johari window. Because when we talk about what people really understand, most of us actually sell products or services that if people actually knew how good they were, they would want them, right? I mean,
well, like we were talking this morning about the Gillette, Fusion, right, with the Power One.
Right. I had the benefit, I actually asked Mark, I saw the ad, I said, it's a real expensive razor. And he says, I know that this is the real thing, and I bought it, and it's phenomenal, okay? And it's not a commercial for it, but it's great stuff.
Jonathan did too, wow.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a terrific product, but the thing is that I'll tell you that if you go to their website, okay, it does not tell me what Mark told me. Mark knows things that are hidden. He knows how good it is because he knows that in 80 different, I can't even imagine what 80 dimensions in shaving possibly were. Okay? All I know is
did it cut it from that angle?
Face, or doesn't hurt my face, or gets close to my lip, or it's like, all right. But 80 different dimensions, and they had to prefer it 2 to 1, or they wouldn't do this. Where is that information, man? Who put that together? Why don't I know that there's such a big difference between the Mach 3 Turbo and the Fusion Power? If I have to spend all this brand new money, okay, why is it that all I get is this flash, and it's all like image? I don't buy a shaver for image. I buy it so that it doesn't hurt my very sensitive.
And there's some people like Jeffrey that just want to know, you know what? We tested this against 80 dimensions, and they improved 2 to 1 each one, and it really is that much of a difference. If you want to know more information about what the 80 dimensions are, which Jeffrey would never click through to because he just never would care.
Right. I just trusted Mark.
Right. But there are people who are methodical enough saying, okay, well, what is the difference? I want to know what those 80 dimensions are. Maybe it's, maybe it's something that really matters to me.
Charlie? All right, good. Charlie.
You talk in the book about sort of the sales channel conflicts that exist in a lot of companies. Yeah, I work for a B2B company today that doesn't have an electronic interface with our customers and believe we need to have one. There comes a point where a customer or maybe even a prospect has researched something in the online environment and then eventually wants to connect to a real person. I mean, how would you coach somebody that's contemplating?
Well, I'll tell you something. There's a science of compensation arts, right? Of how to compensate people appropriately. And I know that it's probably a very painful process, but the system's broken. Thank God. I don't have to fix that. But somebody does. Because you have to give some credit. Some of these companies where we have produced increases for clients in online of millions of dollars. I mean, in some companies, those millions of dollars were 20 or 30% of top line revenues. The people actually responsible for it got a pat on the back and a thank you, because the website was not considered revenue producing.
But it's transformational for the company.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, so there's really a disconnect in the way people are paid, and until people are paid correctly, you can't actually fix that. The problem isn't one of marketing or technology; it's the way people are paid. I wouldn't even
fathom an answer today.
I wouldn't even want to. I would want to take on that problem.
Maybe this time next year we can come back and discuss it. You know.
Tom.
So my question follows along that logic. So, I believe that going through this process will get me to a positive outcome, whether it's $100,000 top line at $10,000, depending on the scale of my company. What are the tools and the methods that I should approach to prove that this worked? And then more importantly, because I'm maybe not the CEO in the elevator, how do I report it to whether I'm Dan, I'm the CEO of the big company or the little company, talking to my employees about getting them jazzed? Give me some points of reference.
Right. So
That's Brian's question.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why we talk about online being a great channel to experiment in, because you can see so much activity and you can measure it fairly easy. There are tons of web analytics tools. I'm the chairman and founder of the Web Analytics Association. You can start from there, so we have a bunch of members. But there are tools everywhere from zero all the way up to very high scale enterprise levels that allow you to measure all through all your channels and integrate all that data. So it really depends on where you are and where you need. But if you're not experimenting and testing and measuring those things in the online level and really taking that to heart and figuring out how we can impact those measures into our financial statements, you're really missing it. I mean, you're just throwing money away in other channels because you haven't figured out, well, is this really relevant or not?
Right. I mean, I think there's a question behind that question as well, which is one of a culture of accountability. Because there's plenty of companies where people have come with exactly that argument, where they got the pat and the good job, right? And they could demonstrate the change, and it wasn't that kind of culture. So, we're maybe very radical, but we're actually practical advocates, of actually rewarding the people who make the difference. So it's a cultural issue, and it's one that certain companies are going to be able to adapt to and other ones aren't, and the ones who adapt are going to do better.
Good. Juan Guillermo.
Yeah. Going back to Charles' point, I think that you guys will make a big difference there, because as I remember, when you guys did a small change in a client's website, the conversion rate just went through the roof. Mm-hmm. Just think about personas, because one of the personas that visits your station's websites, it's me, a media buyer. And it's not considered among the personas. It's just considered for the listeners. Because whenever I go into a site, I type KOL and I Google it or Yahoo it, and I go to the site, there's flash and images and stories, and how the hell do I get in touch with a salesperson? So I'm pretty sure that this guys will help you a lot doing that.
Juan Guillermo, they don't really want your business.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Juan Guillermo spends tens of millions of dollars a year buying radio media.
Right,
and so he is making a very valid point there, yeah. And so, excellent point.
But these are the disconnects that happen day to day. We're still so early and in this crowd, there are people at sort of every level. Some of the questions that Tom is asking as a business development person at Yahoo are perhaps years ahead. Some of them, they're sort of where we're thinking, maybe years ahead of where some of the practical market is, okay? But those are some of the real issues of accountability that what we have today. And I think that's important to point out, is that is something that could have been anticipated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, listen, it's time to wrap up. Thank you for being with us. Thanks to you for watching this DVD. We're recording this before the release of the book from Tuscan Hall at Wizard Academy in Austin, Texas. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I'm Roy Williams. These are my partners, the authors Bryan and Jeffrey Eisenberg. Let's hear it for these guys.